Okay, let's unpack this. We often think about global power, in terms of the big historical markers.
Hmm.
Flags, empires, armies, borders, the usual stuff. But if you really dig deep into the history, and especially the sources we've looked at for this deep dive, this whole concept of empire, well, it seems almost indestructible. It just
Hmm.
keeps changing shape, right? Finding new ways to exert control. So today we're diving into this really compelling argument that the whole era of visible empires, the ones that controlled territory, that might be completely over.
It might be.
The new crown, it seems, is worn somewhere else entirely, maybe online.
And that's really our mission today, isn't it? To explore this core claim. Empires don't really die. They learn to hide. For thousands of years, global dominance meant force, visible force, geographical control,
Yeah.
physical borders.
Yeah, you knew who was in charge.
Exactly. A citizen knew who ruled them. They saw the soldiers, the Roman legionary, maybe the tax collector, the big naval fleet sitting offshore. It was obvious.
Swords and ships, that was the old way, clear as day. Rule was about controlling land, resources, maybe the sea lanes. Very physical.
And the shift,
Hmm.
that's where the real story is, based on what we're seeing. The sources describe this profound change. The new rule, it's exercised differently. Through satellites, maybe. Screens, definitely. Servers humming away somewhere.
Right.
The battleground isn't the physical map anymore, with red lines drawn on it. It's the global network. It's the financial system. It's the algorithms that kind of nudge our behavior.
Okay, so if these complex systems, these integrated networks, if they're the new armies, and if control is becoming more and more invisible, less tied to actual land, then we land on the big question that just jumps out from all this analysis. Who, or maybe even what is going to be the next real global empire?
Hmm.
Is it a country we recognize, China, the US still, or is it a giant corporation? Or maybe
Mm.
something else entirely, something not even human.
It's a huge question.
Hmm.
And I think to even start to understand the future, this future of concealment, we really need to grasp the past, the blueprint of power. We need to trace where this whole idea of empire came from. Start back in the age of visibility where the foundations were laid.
Right. Let's start at the very beginning then. The root of centralized power. Way before Rome, way before Britain. Let's talk about the Akkadian Empire. Roughly 2334 BCE.
Yeah, exactly. This is such critical context because Sargon of Akkad, he was a genuine revolutionary for his time. We're talking Mesopotamia, over 4,000 years ago. He didn't just conquer cities. Lots of people did that. He unified them under a single ruler for the first time, really, on that scale.
Okay.
And the significance isn't just the conquest, it's the administration that came after. That's the key.
So what made it the first empire then? Why not just call it a very large kingdom? What was different?
It was the sheer scale of diversity he had to manage. And the mechanisms he put in place. Think about different languages, different cultures, different local gods even. He had to standardize things. Weights, measures, governance structures across these very distinct groups.
That sounds complicated.
Immensely. It was the first time a ruler successfully applied this template of centralized command. He appointed governors, right? But they answered only to him over this huge, varied territory.
Ah, okay. So the takeaway isn't just big army wins. It's that he formalized the idea of empire. Like he created the template.
Mm.
One ruler can command many different peoples through systems, administrative systems.
Precisely. That's what the source material really emphasizes. The concept of empire itself, this belief that centralized power is maybe the most effective way to organize a large civilization. That idea arguably starts with Akkad. And that fundamental concept, well, it's stuck around, hasn't it? Even though the methods have changed dramatically.
And that model gets refined, maybe even perfected, by the next big player. Rome, the Roman Empire. We're talking, 27 BCE to around the 5th century CE? Rome feels like the classic blueprint, the empire of order.
Oh, absolutely. Rome's genius, if you want to call it that, was realizing that conquest by itself, well, it's expensive, and it doesn't always last. But legal control, structural control, that could be permanent, or at least designed to be.
So they ruled by law, not just by the sword.
Fundamentally, yes. Law was the mechanism, order, enforced through codified rules that applied, in theory, everywhere.
We always hear about Roman infrastructure, the roads, the aqueducts, but these weren't just like public works projects for the citizens' benefit, were they?
Not solely, no. They were absolutely tools of imperial maintenance. Think about the Roman roads. Incredible engineering, built to last, sure, but specifically designed for moving legions quickly, moving officials, and crucially, moving tax revenue back to Rome efficiently.
Right, connecting the empire back to the center.
Exactly. And they standardized coinage across the Mediterranean. That centralized the economy, made trade flow through and depend on the Roman system. And then there's Roman citizenship. That was a masterstroke.
How so?
Well, it was a legal lever, wasn't it? It offered people a path to integration, rights, status, but it also came with duties, obligations, obedience. It was an incredibly powerful tool for assimilation, for
Right.
bringing conquered peoples into the fold and making them feel, well, Roman, or at least part of the system.
So Rome eventually falls, the Western Empire anyway, around 476 CE, but its legacy, that structural blueprint you mentioned,
Yeah.
that lives on.
Indefinitely, you could argue. The sources really stress this point. Think about modern nation-states, our legal systems, parliaments, even how we plan large-scale infrastructure projects. There are echoes of Rome everywhere. That idea of efficient, systemic order.
They kind of proved that if you build the structure right, the idea of your control can outlast the physical empire itself.
That's a great way to put it. The ghost of Rome still walks the halls of power, in a way.
Okay, so if Rome standardized law and order, the next really massive empire seems to have standardized something different. Speed, maybe even chaos. I'm thinking of the Mongol Empire, roughly 1206 to 1368. This kind of flips the Roman ideal on its head, doesn't it? Less about building permanent cities.
Oh, absolutely. The thunder from the east, as they say. Genghis Khan unites the nomadic tribes and builds the largest contiguous land empire the world has ever seen. It's staggering. And the paradox is right there. Like you said, they often didn't settle and build in the same way.
Sometimes they just burned everything.
They could, yeah. Scorched earth was definitely in the playbook if resistance was strong. Their primary weapon wasn't just the skill of the mounted archer. It was fear. Psychological warfare, almost.
Just stop people from even thinking about fighting back.
Exactly. And speed. Unbelievable speed and coordination across vast distances. That was key to control.
But the analysis we looked at suggests that even amidst that chaos, or maybe because of it, they built something crucial, an infrastructure of communication. Is that relevant to our systems discussion?
It's absolutely central. It's perhaps their most defining systemic legacy, ironically. They essentially created the foundation for modern globalization. They consolidated and secured the Silk Road. Under the Pax Mongolica, this period of relative peace across their territory, trade exploded. Ideas, technologies, stuff moved between Asia and Europe like never before.
Okay.
And crucially, they developed the YAM system, this incredible communication network, relay stations, riders, horses, ensuring that orders from the Khan could travel thousands of miles incredibly quickly. Centralized decision-making on a continental scale.
Wow. So the Mongol strategy involved fear and speed, for sure. But their lasting impact was this unity through fast communication and trade, a precursor to our connected world.
It's a perfect analogy, really. They showed that control doesn't always need giant stone monuments. Sometimes it needs highly efficient connections, adaptable networks, and the ability to get the ruler's message out fast.
Okay, moving forward again. From the horses of the steppe, we shift to ships, lots of ships. The British Empire, dominant from, say, the 1600s through the 1900s. And this seems like another crucial shift, maybe the last big one in that age of visibility we talked about. The goal wasn't just owning land anymore, was it? It was owning the world's roots.
Yes, the British model was, well, it was a masterclass in global systemic control, building on what came before but adapting it for a maritime world. They figured out that controlling, what was it, a quarter of the planet's landmass? It wasn't about having a soldier on every corner.
Right.
It was about absolute dominance over the critical sea lanes, the choke points, the trade route.
And the Royal Navy was the tool for that.
The ultimate tool.
Yeah.
Securing passages like the Suez Canal, the Straits of Malacca. If you controlled the sea, you controlled global commerce.
Yeah.
And Britain did.
By around 1920, something like 1 out of every 4 people on Earth lived under the British flag. That's just mind-boggling reach. And they imposed systems, didn't they? Financial systems, common law in many places, building railways, ports, all feeding back to London.
Absolutely. They set global standards. Think about Greenwich Mean Time, that's British, standardizing shipping charts and lanes. They created a kind of uniform global operating system for trade and communication.
Which naturally cemented their dominance.
Of course. But the sources are clear on this too. This empire also left deep scars. Exploitation, control, the redrawing of borders without local consent. That's part of the legacy too. And importantly for our discussion, when this vast, visible empire eventually faded, worn out by wars, facing independence movements, the world didn't suddenly become a collection of truly equal nations.
No.
No. It simply moved into the shadow of the next empire, one that was already learning to be much more subtle. an empire built almost entirely on invisible systems.
And that transitions us perfectly into the modern era. Part two. Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because now we're watching this definitive shift away from owning territory towards owning the system, owning the network, not just the land deed.
And this transition is practically synonymous with the rise of the United States, especially after World War II. Now, obviously, the U.S. maintained and maintains a very powerful military, no question. But its real imperial structure, the foundation of its global power, was built differently. It was built on systems, finance, culture, not just soldiers occupying land in the old way.
Right, and the sources we looked at make a really specific, powerful claim here. They say the U.S. dollar essentially became the new crown. It took over the role the British pound used to have as the global standard. But how? How does a currency, enforce obedience globally? That sounds abstract.
It does, but it's incredibly concrete when you look at the mechanisms.
Yeah.
There are two key ones we have to understand. Both show this invisible force. First, the petrodollar system. This is crucial. After agreements made back in the early 1970s, oil, probably the single most vital global commodity, was priced and traded almost exclusively in U.S. dollars.
Okay, so what does that mean practically?
It means every nation needing to buy oil, which is basically everyone, regardless of their politics or relationship with the U.S., had to acquire and hold large amounts of U.S. currency, and often U.S. Treasury bonds to park those dollars.
Wow, okay. So if you want to keep the lights on, power your factories, run your cars,
Yes.
you have to play the American financial game.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's systemic obedience, not enforced by a soldier pointing a gun, but by sheer economic necessity.
Exactly. And the second mechanism is maybe even more powerful for enforcement, the SWIFT system.
SWIFT, that's the bank messaging thing.
Right. It's the global network banks use to communicate and execute international transactions.
Yeah.
Millions of them every day. Now, technically, it's based in Belgium. But in practice, the U.S. government holds significant influence, effectively controlling access to it.
So they can, kick countries out?
They can,
Yeah.
and they have. If the U.S. imposes sanctions on a nation, they can pressure SWIFT to cut off that nation's banks, effectively, instantly freezing them out of the global financial system, the lifeblood of trade.
That is the absolute definition of invisible rule, isn't it? Wow. I mean, the U.S. still has a huge physical presence, military bases in, over 70 countries. That's visible. But this economic power, it's enforced through code, through transaction protocols. It's hidden in plain sight.
And we absolutely cannot forget the cultural piece. The sources nail this. It's arguably the first empire without traditional borders because it aimed to conquer the mind, not just the land. Think about the sheer volume of exported culture. Hollywood movies, American music, blue jeans, fast food.
The American dream exported globally.
Precisely. It defined the global aspiration for decades, this idea of freedom, individualism, consumer choice. It made millions, billions of people want to participate in the American system. That kind of soft power is incredibly potent, maybe more durable than force.
But that kind of dominance, cultural and financial, it almost always creates a reaction, doesn't it? A challenger eventually emerges. And in the 21st century, that challenger is clearly China, a rising Chinese empire, as the sources frame it. And importantly, its method seems radically different. It's not trying to out-Hollywood Hollywood, is it? It's using economics in a different way.
That's right. China's ascent isn't really powered by guns, at least not primarily in an expansionist sense yet. It's powered by signing contracts, by making massive investments. The core mechanism we need to understand is the Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI.
Right, we hear that term a lot.
It's this absolutely monumental infrastructure project. Think new ports, railways, pipelines, digital networks, connecting Asia, Europe, Africa, even parts of the Americas. It involves over 150 countries now.
But this isn't like old school British colonization, is it? They're not sending governors to rule these countries directly. It's more like creating an economic orbit. China funds the projects with huge loans, often Chinese loans.
Exactly. And this is where the analysis gets deeper and sometimes controversial. It's often termed debt trap diplomacy.
Okay, what does that mean? Give us an example.
Well, the classic, maybe most cited example is the Hambantota port in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka took massive loans from China to build this strategic port. But the project wasn't commercially viable enough, and Sri Lanka couldn't keep up with the debt repayments.
So what happened?
China essentially foreclosed. They secured a 99-year lease on the port. Effectively, debt was converted into long-term control over a critical piece of strategic infrastructure.
Wow. So China is, in a way, quietly buying or leasing the physical plumbing of the world. The ports, the railways, maybe fiber optic cables too, the things the U.S. system kind of takes for granted for global trade.
That's a very sharp way to put it. They're securing the hard assets. And it reflects a different philosophy, perhaps. The sources capture this difference in perception really well. In the West, this is often framed as just business, infrastructure development, maybe with some geopolitical angles. But within the Chinese political thinking, it can be seen very differently, as fulfilling a kind of destiny, a return to being the center of global power, a patient, long-game strategy to pull the developing world into Beijing's economic and eventually political sphere of influence.
So we end up with this incredible clash of models, the US versus China. It's not tanks rolling across borders, it's systems colliding.
It really is the ultimate systemic competition, isn't it?
Yeah.
You have the U.S. relying on its established cultural draw, its financial dominance, the power of the dollar, the SWIFT network as a weapon, soft power, backed by hard financial plumbing. And then you have China using aggressive infrastructure investment, contractual obligations, debt, building out the physical networks, acquiring hard assets, integrating countries through economic ties.
So they're competing over the rules of the game and also the physical pathways the game is played on.
Exactly. And both are empires of systems, deeply concealed compared to the visible power of Sargon's armies or Roman legions.
Okay, that complexity, that hidden nature, it sets us up perfectly for the next stage of this analysis, part 3. Because the source material goes even further, it suggests the next empire might not even be a country at all. Now we're getting into the realm of truly invisible crowns. Entities without flags, without geography.
This is where the idea of concealment becomes almost absolute, right? The next dominant force might not have a capital city you can point to on a map. No flag, maybe no standing army in the traditional sense. It could just be, well, a collection of logos or lines of code.
The first candidate proposed for this invisible throne is the corporate empire, ruling not by law, but by data, and maybe by addiction.
Yeah, the territory of this kingdom is data. Specifically, the enormous ocean of data generated every second by billions of people online. These corporate systems aren't built on oil fields or fertile land. They're built on information. Information about human behavior, desires, thoughts.
And they don't rule by fear, like the Mongols you mentioned.
Not primarily, no. They rule, arguably, by creating addiction, or at least indispensability. Services and digital environments that we integrate so deeply into our lives that they constantly shape our behavior, often without us even noticing.
The sources we looked at get really specific here, identifying the new sovereigns and their sort of digital territories. It's actually kind of frightening when you lay it out.
It is. Let's consider their spheres of influence. Google. It doesn't just find information for you, it processes your intent. It knows what you're thinking about, worrying about, wanting to buy through your search queries. That's a deep psychological insight. Apple. Through the iPhone, the ecosystem, it literally owns your attention for hours every single day. It controls the primary interface through which many people experience modern life. Meta, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp. It shapes your social connections, your sense of belonging, even your emotions, through carefully curated feeds and social feedback loops. It influences who you think you are and who you think they are.
And Amazon.
Amazon is becoming the underlying infrastructure for consumption. It delivers your desires to your doorstep. But even more critically, through Amazon Web Services, AWS, it provides the cloud computing backbone for a huge chunk of the internet itself, including many of its competitors and even government agencies.
And the currency they all extract from us day in, day out, the sources say it's basically our time, our attention.
Absolutely. Your attention span. The minutes you spend scrolling, clicking, waiting for that notification, that dopamine hit, that's the raw material. But it's even deeper, isn't it? This whole model is often called surveillance capitalism.
Explain that a bit more.
The core idea is that the real product isn't the social connection or the search result. The real product is a prediction about your future behavior. These companies collect vast data trails to build models that predict what you'll click, what you'll buy, what you'll believe. And then they sell those predictions, those guarantees of outcomes, to advertisers, political campaigns, anyone willing to pay to influence behavior.
So they're not just selling ads next to content, they're selling certainty about us, engineered certainty.
Precisely. They're selling the modification and control of human behavior at scale.
Okay, so this massive corporate power, it doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? The sources talk about an even broader web, the system empire, this fusion of invisible decisions.
Yeah, this is like the underlying operating system that connects all these pieces. Finance, big tech, global commodity markets, the application of behavioral psychology. It's an empire made of, well, abstract things. Banks, yes. but also lines of code, credit ratings, international agreements, and seemingly neutral algorithms whose decisions shape global realities, often completely outside the direct control of any single elected government.
Let's try and make that more concrete. Pull back the curtain a bit. What are the actual mechanisms of control within this system empire? Because they sound like they define our world right now.
Okay, let's look at a few.
Mhm.
First, think about central banks, especially the U.S. Federal Reserve, because the dollar is still the global reserve currency. When the Fed adjusts interest rates in Washington, D.C., that decision instantly ripples outwards. It affects borrowing costs for governments and corporations all over the planet.
So the economic fate of entire nations can hang on the decisions of these unelected officials.
That's systemic financial control at the highest level. It's largely invisible to the average person, but incredibly powerful.
What else? The sources mentioned things like credit rating agencies.
Exactly. Moody's, S&P, Fitch. These are private companies.
Yeah.
But they issue sovereign debt ratings, basically, grading a country's financial health. A downgrade from one of these agencies can trigger a massive sell-off of a country's bonds, potentially sparking a debt crisis overnight, regardless of that country's army or resources.
So they control the narrative of who is financially sound, which becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
In many ways, yes. They wield enormous influence over global capital flows. And third, think about the information systems themselves. Social media platforms don't just host our chats. Their algorithms actively control what we see, what news gets prioritized, what opinions get amplified, what gets suppressed.
They shape the narrative. They shape what we believe is true.
They absolutely do. Algorithms decide what, based on complex models designed for engagement or other goals we can't see or audit. This overall system, this fusion, it fundamentally owns behavior. It doesn't need armies when it can shape belief and economic reality so effectively.
This is intense, this level of decentralized hidden control. And it leads us directly to the final candidate, the most abstract, maybe the most profound one, the AI empire. The possibility of a non-human future ruler.
And this potential empire isn't emerging from a specific place like Washington or Beijing or London. Its cradle is the data center, rows upon rows of servers, cooled and humming. AI represents the potential culmination of systemic control because it can operate, in theory, without human limitations, without irrationality or ego or biological needs, just pure, optimized efficiency.
So artificial intelligence offers the ultimate efficient hidden governance. It doesn't need soldiers. It doesn't need voters to give it legitimacy. It just runs, optimizes things.
Its only real requirement for power, the sources suggest, is access. Total uninterrupted access. Access to our data streams, our communication networks, our financial transactions, our logistical systems, our personal habits, and crucially, our trust in the digital systems it manages.
And once an AI or a network of AIs controls the majority of those core functions, global logistics, financial flows, energy grids, maybe even information dissemination.
Then its ability to manage, to influence, to control human systems, humanity itself, it can become absolute without ever declaring itself emperor.
And the really unnerving part maybe is the opacity the sources mention, how these systems make decisions. We hear about emergent behavior in AI.
Exactly. That's when these complex AI models develop capabilities or reach conclusions that their human creators didn't explicitly program or even anticipate.
So the system starts doing things we don't fully understand.
It can, yes. And if an AI's decisions that might dictate traffic patterns, set market prices, allocate medical resources, or filter news, are based on calculations far too complex for any human to realistically audit or comprehend, then the algorithm effectively becomes the law, a new kind of law.
Enforced not by police, but just by optimized necessity, because the system says so.
That's the potential endpoint. It leads to this chilling question the sources pose. If the ultimate ruling entity is just pure, efficient code, without a body, without empathy, without even a location, could the next great empire not be human at all?
Which brings us right back around, doesn't it? A full circle from the very human ambition of Sargon of Akkad wanting to rule Mesopotamia to the potential abstraction of an algorithmic ruler. Let's try and synthesize this.
Yeah, if we connect all these threads, look at the big picture that emerges from the sources.
Yeah.
We see these four incredibly powerful structures all operating and vying for influence right now simultaneously. You've got China rising aggressively, using contracts and infrastructure to integrate vast regions into its system.
Okay.
You have the United States still wielding immense power through its established financial networks, the dollar, its cultural influence, and its military reach, still very much a major player.
Right.
You have the corporate empires, the tech giants, relentlessly growing, mining data, shaping behavior, monetizing our attention in ever more sophisticated ways.
Hmm.
And then you have artificial intelligence, rapidly evolving, becoming deeply embedded in all the other systems, potentially emerging as a decisive, non-human force multiplier or even controller. And this complex interplay, this competition, actually forces them all to become more concealed, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because no single one can achieve total visible dominance in the old style.
So what does this all mean? This terrifying, but yeah, intellectually fascinating analysis. What does it mean for, for you listening right now? I think the core conclusion, the real takeaway from this deep dive into the source material is pretty stark. The next empire, it didn't need to stage a dramatic entrance. It didn't need to rise. It's already here. It is the operating system of modern life.
That's put very well. The sources really try to personalize this to make you, the listener, understand. The era of watching the horizon for the next conqueror's flag, that's over. You aren't necessarily serving a king or queen in a distant palace anymore. You're participating every day in these vast networks of power, networks that often don't have a single face or a clear origin point.
Every single time you unlock your phone, scroll through that feed that seems tailored just for you. Tap your card or phone to pay for something. You're contributing resources, your data, your time, your attention, your money. You're feeding one of these new sovereigns. You're serving a system built on code and contracts and algorithms, not on old-fashioned treaties and territories.
So the final thought, maybe the most provocative one to leave you with, comes right back to that central idea. Empires never truly die. They just move online. They learn to hide in plain sight. The throne is still there. It's definitely occupied. But the crown, it's not made of gold and jewels anymore. It's woven from data, debt, and deterministic code. And it really forces us, maybe requires us, to think much more deeply about the systems we interact with every single day, who built them, and ultimately, who do they truly serve?